91 by patients, the FSHD Society is the largest grassroots network of FSHD patients, their families, and research activists. The FSHD Society offers a community of support, news, and information for the millions of people affected by FSHD worldwide. This is FSHD Society Radio. Welcome all to the FSHD Society Radio Show. Thanks for being here and spending some time with us on another episode. If you want to get in touch with the show, you can do that. Email is always the best, fshdradio@fshdsociety.org. I'd love to hear from the listeners. If you have show ideas, if you have comments about the show, questions just for me, I'm open to all of that. Special thank you to all of our sponsors of this show, like Perkin Elmer, Therapeutics, and Fulcrum Therapeutics. Always great to have them aboard, kind of helping, push the show along. And we've had them on a couple of different shows and talking about the things they're doing for our group, for our community. Throughout the show, at the end, we'll talk a little bit about what's coming up in other events. But today we have a guest that is waiting in the wings, and I believe he is actually back. I think I can safely say back by popular demand, is Jamshid Arjomand. He is the Chief Science Officer of the FSHD Society, and I know everyone knows him. So we welcome now Jamshid. Welcome, Jamshid. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thank you very much for having me again. I guess I did a little bit better last time than I thought.
Oh man, I mean, I got the response from Lee of we have to have Jamshid on again and more often. I'm like, what? All right, let's go. Let's do the superstar, and then that's what we got to do. Where are you at right now? Like, where are we?
Great question. Yeah, this is a slightly different background than I think you've seen me in the past. I'm actually in the Lexington office at our FSHD headquarters. As you know, because of the pandemic, we've all been working remotely, and I'm actually based out of San Diego myself. So I used to come to the office every other month or so for a week to kind of touch base with my colleagues. But since the pandemic, we've been working remotely. And as of August of this year, once people were vaccinated and travel was a little bit safer, we decided to get back together on a quarterly basis and not only kind of meet up face to face with all of my colleagues, but also start planning and having strategic discussions for the future about what needs to be prioritized, how we're going to organize things. So right now, we've just spent the second day from a 3-day gathering where we're planning for 2022 and all the great things that are going to come up. So it's been really great to see my friends and colleagues and to also plan for 2022.
Sounds pretty exciting. I mean, what can you tease our way of any of those plans, or is this all still under wraps for the time?
No, nothing. We have Lee Reynolds is heading out the marketing campaign. So they have these strategies of like bringing all the information and making it public. We're trying to be as transparent as possible with all the activities that are going to come up. So there is going to be a steady stream of emails, newsletters, webinars that will probably lead into everything that's going to happen for the year. But what is really exciting for me is this travel, since travel has been quite restricted due to COVID, things are starting to open up again. And this office gathering is actually coming at the tail end of a week-long meeting that was taking place at the Richmond CTRN, which is the VCU, Virginia Commonwealth University, which is one of our clinical trial research sites, headed by Dr. Nicholas Johnson. Nick Johnson is the site head over there. And so the VCU team did a spectacular job. They organized a meeting. This is a CTRN meeting. So all of the clinical trial research sites that are part of the network were participating in this meeting. All of the US sites were represented not only by the lead clinician, but by the physical therapists and the study coordinators. everybody came for a 2-day meeting. The first day of the meeting, all of the sites, including the European sites who unfortunately couldn't travel, so they joined us virtually. But the goal of the first day of the meeting was to review the data that's been collected as part of the observational natural history study called RESOLVE. This is a study that's recruited, I think, close to about 300 patients across the US and Europe to study a variety of clinical outcome measure tests that are hopefully going to be deployed in various clinical trials. So these are ways of validating these endpoints, functional endpoints that companies might want to use in a clinical trial. So over 2 years, they're trying to see how reproducible they are across sites. Are they showing, do they show the needle moving with disease progression? And they're trying to validate them. And so it was fantastic. The data, they collect so much data during that study. For any of our family members who are participating, thank you so much. This is, I know it's probably a very demanding day for them because not only do they do the whole battery of tests and exercises, and so it must be very demanding, but all of the data, all the measurements that are taken are then divided up across the sites, and then each team presented on some analysis that they had done. And when I spoke to the different presenters, they had just gotten the data the week before. So in a very short amount of time, they were able to analyze and do a deep dive and kind of give a preview of really what to expect from some of these outcome measures. And some of them look very promising. Some of them don't seem to move to be very significant. So over time, those are probably going to be dropped out. And companies then will get to pick the outcome measures that are most relevant for whatever treatment they're developing and incorporating them in their clinical trials. So that was day one. Wow. It was just fantastic to see all of that data. On day two, they did something that was really phenomenal. There are other muscular dystrophies that are doing similar kind of studies as the RESOLVE, and they have also their own network of clinicians. And as it turns out, FSHD and myotonic dystrophy are very similar, and a lot of the same clinicians work in both, and they provide care for both types of patients. And so there was a combined meeting, and the whole goal here was to see what can we learn from each other, what can FSHD learn from myotonic dystrophy and vice versa, and what tools maybe that one group has generated might be useful for the other team. And this is how science advances. It's really through collaborative efforts. And not only is the CTRN a great example of this collaborative effort amongst all the sites that are doing FSHD work, but now it's cross-pollinating into other fields, and we're learning from myotonic dystrophy. And maybe in the future, there will be other groups like the limb-girdle group could also participate. Logistically, it's quite challenging to get everybody in the same room, but this is something that's really looks very promising to me, and I'm very excited to have seen at this last meeting.
Wow, that's a lot. I mean, that's day two. I mean, that
was day two
going on.
Yeah, and then the other thing, I mean, these guys, so not only did they do, so actually I mentioned limb-girdle because for the VCU team, they started out with limb-girdle, and they had 2 days of limb-girdle, then they had a day of FSHD, and myotonic dystrophy joined together, and then they did another day of myotonic dystrophy. And then we're on Saturday, and then they hosted the VCU 360, which used to be called the Family Day. And a lot of the clinicians and participants from the FSHD and the FSHD myotonic dystrophy day that were present stayed for Saturday, and they gave presentations to the families who are using the CTRN sites at the VCU. And so that was a fantastic meeting. We had again, in person is a little bit restricted, but we had in-person participants and also about 50 people that joined us virtually for that meeting. So that was very exciting. And we heard from various companies. Dr. Statland, who is one of the directors of the Clinical Trial Research Network, gave an overview of the different studies that are ongoing, and it was great.
Wow. What are you most excited about that you learned within those couple days? It sounds like just a massive amount of data and collaboration. I'm sure it was very overwhelming to try to absorb
It is.
information.
And I took a bunch of notes, and I'm gonna, as soon as I get back, I'm on the flight back to San Diego, I'll be deciphering my notes to kind of digest it. But I think what's exciting is seeing some of the outcome measures that are being validated through the CTR, and that looks, some of them look really great. And the sensitivity is really what we're after. We're trying to make sure there are sensitive enough tests. So when a pharmaceutical company is running a clinical trial, they are using tests that are reliable, sensitive, where we can expect to see a change in the untreated group. I remember clinical trials are experiments where you're trying to just have one variable change, and that's with the drug or without the drug. And you're trying to see a change in an outcome measure that's meaningful and significant to patients. And to have a bunch of tests being validated, that gives the pharmaceutical companies much more confidence when they're designing their clinical trial, that if they use a particular test, they should expect to see, let's say, a 5% or a 3% change. And so they can actually design their study with enough power, with enough participants to make sure that they're meeting all of those statistical requirements that the regulatory agencies like the FDA requires to show that the a treatment is truly effective. And so that's very exciting. It's exciting to see that those tests are being validated. It was great to see pharmaceutical companies actually were present at the meeting, and they were able to ask questions, and they're going to be able to also probably mine their own data, mine the data just to be really confident when they're investing in a clinical trial. And the whole the challenge with clinical trials is you have to define everything up front for the regulatory agency. You have to tell them exactly what tests you're going to run, what your expected outcome is, what kind of statistical methods you're going to use. All of this has to be predefined. So it's must be very nerve-wracking for the people who are designing the tests, because if you have to choose between several different tests, which ones do you select as your primary outcome? And without validation, that's even more challenging.
So is this, am I translating this right then? This is almost like a roadmap a little bit for pharmaceuticals to know which way they're going to go, or giving them confidence in the direction that they decide on?
Yes, it's basically validating a series of tests. So there's a lot of different tests, maybe for mobility, leg strength. And so all of the different tests are being measured, and the pharmaceutical companies can now select the test that they think is going to be more applicable for their treatment. And they're going to have the confidence they need when they make that selection that, all right, we're selecting something that should show a difference and that we should be able to detect improvement or the effect of the drug. So I think it's a completely utilitarian meeting, and that the data are really going to be useful for the pharmaceutical companies, but it's also bringing a wealth of knowledge on what the natural history of the disease is, because as you know, FSHD is so incredibly variable, asymmetric and variable, and so trying to understand within a defined population of how it progresses, I think gives us a better understanding of what to expect.
So it feels like we've come then quite a long ways, haven't we, from just finding DUX4 to what you're talking about now? It seems like it's leaps and bounds.
Yes, so the biology is aside. This is mostly just observational. This trial is just developing tools for clinical trials
Got it.
and giving us a better understanding. So in parallel, there is the whole research arm, and a lot of the same clinicians are involved in research that they're doing. So trying to find points of intervention. And I think that was, unfortunately, we had very limited time because it was such a packed days that during the breaks, when everybody's trying to grab coffee, you see someone and you're like, hey, tell me about what you're doing in your lab. So this is a lot of the clinicians wear multiple hats. They do clinical care, they do trials, and then they do research. I don't know how they manage to do it all.
Yeah,
it's absolutely amazing. And then when you see them not only doing FSHD work, but they're also doing myotonic dystrophy, and you realize, wow, they're also an expert in myotonic dystrophy or in limb girdle, then that's when I really am impressed and amazed at how good these people are.
So from a patient standpoint that's listening now, there's some key words that pop out, pharmaceutical companies and these, trying to find treatment might even be used. I think that you used in there. Those are going to be key words, right? They're going to pop out for the average listener that's not quite understanding the full path of why the CTRN is so important, why these 2 days of meetings at VCU 360 was so important. I guess to kind of almost scale it down to that particular listener that's going, okay, then what does this mean for us on the path to a treatment? Is this headway? Is this good progress?
Yes. So a couple of things. So from the whole clinical trial research network, I think the importance of the network is that there are usually clinical trials when a company is trying to test the effectiveness of a drug. They have to run a complex study across the country. It's quite often it's international, so it involves sites in Europe, maybe Canada, in the US. They need to be able to recruit patients fairly effectively and efficiently to enter the trial. And then every site needs to be equipped with knowledgeable staff so they can run the exact same tests the exact same way. And it's because you're administering the test across the country, across countries with different languages. Mm-hmm. So everything has to be standardized. Now, if there is no network, the pharmaceutical company has to set that up, and it can take years to set it up. So the CTRN has already been set up. The society, amongst with other groups, helped fund the start of the CTRN with 4 sites. There's received funding from other agencies, from NIH, and the Muscular Dystrophy Association to grow it. And then they started this RESOLVE study, and the RESOLVE study actually gives them the tools to set up a standardized protocol across all the sites. So another thing that I didn't mention is while a lot of the science was being discussed and the results were being discussed, a lot of the physical therapists that actually administered the test, they went off site and they were going through all of the tests that they perform to make sure that everybody was doing it the same way. So they actually go through a practical exercise of making sure that it's standardized. And if there's any questions that people say, well, we can't do this test, we don't have the machine, they try to find the appropriate thing to replace it. So you're comparing apples to apples when you're in the Netherlands versus if you're in Ohio or VCU.
Wow,
that's so
huge.
That's really I think from my perspective is if somebody wants to launch a clinical trial, they have the infrastructure to get started, and all of the sites are experts and they all know how to perform these tests the exact same way as the other site. So the startup time that's required to train everyone is minimal. And I think that's the real strength of it. Now, you add to that, you know which tests might be better than others. You can actually streamline the whole trial and only use the tests that are the most meaningful, that are going to be the more accurate tests, the validated ones. That's the one that you're going to incorporate. So it ends up being better for the whoever is sponsoring the trial, whatever pharmaceutical company is running. They have a good set of tests to choose from, and they have the network to
use as well.
So this is what I'm excited.
Yeah, it sounds like then it saves time and saves money. I mean, is
It's
that
a well-oiled machine?
Yeah, that sounds
Yes.
great. Wow.
Yeah, it's well-oiled machine is what comes to mind. It's very smooth the way it's operating. So and it must have been quite challenging to set it up, but the people are just really impressive.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's amazing. That's good stuff. I mean, we've only got, just a scratch in the surface here. Jamshid, you're really bringing it now. So you got the excitement level up of just those 2 days of what you have to bring for us. That's awesome news. It sounds like it's really big positive push in the right direction. Can you talk a little bit? I know there's other things going on that you're working with, some of which is the grants. Is that something that's been in the works as well, or something that the FSHD Society does too? Can you talk about that? The thing like
yes, of course. So I'm very happy to. So the society, it's been in operation for 30 years, and one of the things that it's always done is fund research. And these are basic research, or it could be more clinical-oriented research, but to give us a better understanding of how the disease progresses, what are the mechanisms that are involved. This is how DUX4 was identified, and what does DUX4 do into muscle, and what are the points of intervention. So we've been funding research for a while, and way before I arrived. I've only been with the society for 2.5 years, but the grant cycles, there's 2 grant cycles. So academic researchers can, mostly they're academic researchers, they can submit proposals of what kind of research they want to do and why it's important. And then we have a very talented scientific advisory board that reviews the grants and selects the top grants that they think are going to be impactful, and those we fund, and the research goes on. And typically at the end of the research there's a publication, and there's been a number of very seminal publications that have come out from studies that we have funded that advance the field of better understanding the disease pathology and identify points of intervention. So obviously, this is something that we've been doing, and I'm always very excited when I see the proposals. And I'm glad there's a scientific advisory board that helps select, because quite often most of them look really good to me. Yeah. So what we end up doing is what happened with COVID is we had just finished reviewing a cycle of grants, and we had notified the awardees that they were going to receive funding. And obviously there's most of these grants are sometimes 1 or 2 years long, so we also carry over activities from the previous year. And then COVID happens, and everything shuts down. All the universities also shut down, and research kind of comes to a screeching halt. So we really didn't know what to expect, whether research was going to be able to pick up, or all of the people who are working in the lab now suddenly going to be unemployed, is the salary going to be covered? So what we chose to do is, instead of having another cycle of grants, we put that on hold, and we just wanted to make sure that the grants that we are currently funding, are they going to need extra support? And we wanted to make sure that we helped out the activities that we were already investing in, making sure that they could carry on once labs reopen. So this is always a little bit scary when there's a pause in research. When you have a good momentum and the momentum stops, what's going to happen? Are people going to quit? They're going to say, well, research is not going to pick up, university is going to stay closed, maybe I'll switch and I'll start teaching or doing something else. Thankfully, all of the researchers, I have to say, across the world, we fund research internationally. They managed to keep all of their employees and keep them their salaries going, so we didn't have to spend any of that surplus that was on reserve to help them out. We didn't have to spend any of that. And once labs started reopening, people started going back to work. Well, during the downtime, people started writing proposals and thinking about, well, what would I do next? And so when we reopened the next grant proposal, we got a record number of applications. We typically get around 15 or maybe a little under 15 applications. We got over 25, maybe 27 proposals, and they were really, really high quality. So when the scientific advisory board was reviewing them, they picked 10 out of 25 or 27. They said, these are going to be impactful, and you guys need to figure out, you should fund these. Mm-hmm. So in the first cycle of 2021, we funded about $1.3 million worth of grants. And we typically fund about $1 million across 2 cycles. So we exceeded, in one cycle, we exceeded what we would do for a whole year. And then we had a second cycle, and we got 17 proposals, and 5 of those proposals were funded. So in total, in 2021, we are funding slightly over $2 million worth of grants. So I wish it's something that we could keep going in 2022 and 2023, but that's going to be challenging. This was an exceptional year because we had a little bit of surplus from 2020, so we were able to kind of use that to basically jumpstart the whole academic research. And I'm very excited that we got so many good proposals to fund. I wish we had deeper pockets and we could fund even more, but this is pretty impressive. I'm really excited.
We have to fundraise more, right? I mean, that's kind of where that comes from. So that's
sure. Absolutely.
And the studies and this and that, great. And now we push for more fundraising dollars to help fund more grants. I mean, am I being too ground level on that? No. Or is that what we're looking at here?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's good to have, obviously more dollars helps up, means that we can fund more diverse research, more research. We don't have to make that call when we have 2 proposals like, okay, which one do we fund? We can fund
both
of them. Right. But there is, I'm sure that my colleagues are going to kill me if they hear me say this, but it's good to have to make hard decisions. And this is what the scientific advisory board does so well, because we could fund everything, but having a little bit of competition and having people really work hard to put a really logical and a well thought out project about how this is going to help the field and really think about the downstream applications, that goes a long ways. And I think it's good to be able to have to make those hard calls and decide that, all right, this one sounds, it sounds promising, so we're going to take a chance with it. And this is research, so nobody ever knows if it's going to pan out or not. But I think it's a good process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I totally understand what you're saying, that you almost want it to be a difficult decision. That means the research is that good or the proposals are that good. So there's, making tough choices. It's not like, okay, these all are not what we want, and it's a no-brainer. No, you kind of, I think I'm on the same page with you. You want it to be tough. You want it to be a difficult decision. That just goes to show how good the talent is, basically, that's coming your way, or the possibilities. That's good news. Wow. That's phenomenal. Because I do get that question sometimes, when I'm doing either a fundraising thing or, especially if it's on the local level, and I'm trying to translate to the people like, this is why we need this so much. And that really spells it out. That's part of the push of why we need the dollars, because there's so many good proposals out there that we can push grant money to, that the more we have, then it's easier. You're right, not to make a decision of not this, but that, but you can say, okay to both. That was a great way of explaining it.
Oh, great. And I'm very excited. We just are about to start receiving the next batch of application, which is going to be reviewed in early 2022. 2022. And we've learned from last year, we were kind of trying to work the timing, and we did something that was a bad idea. I think we made the deadline December 31st. So we ruined a lot of people's holidays and New Year's by making the deadline at the last minute. So this time we put the deadline to be December 15th, so people can submit their proposals and have a nice end of the year holiday and relax with their friends and families, because they, even researchers need to relax also, and they need family time. So.
Right. Absolutely. Yes. They can't just be machines, working like crazy.
Oh, I got a couple of really good emails like, why do you do this to us? Why do you make the deadline right around the Christmas holiday, New Year's, and then 6 months later around 4th of July weekend? Like, why do you do this?
Yeah, why do you not know? Do you not look at your calendar? Well, that's good though. I mean, that you kind of listen to that call a little bit and like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, I guess we can do it this way. And you're right. You want them to not be stressed,
Exactly.
Take some of the stress away. What do you like on the horizon? You talked about a lot of things with what's happening currently, and catching us up maybe even a little bit, right? And things that have just been happening and getting people in the now, as they say. And so what do you like in the horizon? What can you share that way?
Yeah, right now we're working on a genetic testing initiative. And one of the things we heard from the patient community when Fulcrum was recruiting for their trial is people wanted to participate. And one of the requirements, eligibility requirements, was to have a positive genetic test for FSHD. And many of our family members were unable to get a genetic test for several reasons. One, the tests are really expensive and insurance companies don't always want to pay for it. The testing facilities are actually quite limited. There's only, at the time, there was only one that was available. This was University of Iowa. And many doctors, unless they are really, they're experts in FSHD, they don't even know how to order the test. So getting a medical referral to get genetic testing for FSHD is very difficult. So we heard from patients who said, well, my doctor says there is, they don't know how to order it, so they're telling me it's not necessary, or, and it was just, we heard a lot of this. So we thought it would be it would be very important if we have multiple trials that are going to launch in 2022, early 2023, to make sure that that's no longer a barrier, and that we have our patient community who's willing to participate in these trials actually have that, meet that eligibility criteria. They have that test done so they can volunteer. And the way going around this is, so a couple of great things happened as we were thinking about how to tackle this problem is, first of all, PerkinElmer, one of your sponsors, adopted this new technology that actually cut the costs down quite a bit. So the costs are about $700 instead of $2,000 or $3,000 that was before. So that's very, very useful. And then we've learned from other diseases, just like I said, we had that CTRN meeting with myotonic dystrophy in the limb girdle muscular dystrophy world. They also had a problem with genetic testing and sorting out. There's like 20 different types of mutations in limb girdle muscular dystrophy, and trying to figure out which group has what mutation. They set up this genetic testing initiative for limb girdle, where different companies and nonprofits pooled their resources, and they developed this test that would basically, all the limb girdle patients would get tested to be able to identify which mutation they have. And this was a great precedent. I think it was developed maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and it's still going. There's now panels, and so we kind of copied that model. We identified a company that can provide genetic counseling. They can provide the medical referral, and they can then direct the patients to go get a blood draw. The group that does the blood draw will then send the samples either to PerkinElmer or University of Iowa. So we're trying to make sure that there is capacity by involving both PerkinElmer and University of Iowa. And if there's other companies that develop genetic testing for FSHD, we would like to include them as well.
Nice.
And the way we're trying to do this is also with resources being provided by pharmaceutical companies. We're trying to make this a fully sponsored covered, so it doesn't cost patients anything to get the genetic test done. And they're going to get all the appropriate resources as well. They're going to get the genetic counseling that's so important for genetic testing. So all of that is going to be provided. So right now we're still trying to, it's a complex program. It involves a lot of different groups. And so we kind of have the path laid out. We have all the participants aware of what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. We're just missing a few little pieces that we're trying to figure out, and hopefully we'll be able to launch this before the end of the year. And it's very exciting because I think that's if that's a rate limiting step for recruiting clinical trials, we want to make sure we've removed that hurdle, and that anybody who wants to participate can get a test done that's going to be accepted by pharmaceutical companies to enter their trials. So I'm very excited about this, and I'm really happy that the pharmaceutical companies are seeing this as an important activity, and so they're contributing to it. So they're providing funds to support this effort, and that's really been wonderful.
Wow. Yeah, I know I've had the genetic test done. It's not cheap. And I am very familiar with the University of Iowa sending my money there. So yes, I know all too well that
I have to say that the people at the University of Iowa are really wonderful. They're really, really dedicated, and they will always provide the test. It's just a very complex test, and the cost isn't that they're lining their pockets and buying fancy cars. It's a demanding and challenging test to do, and it's very labor intensive, and it's very specialized labor. So they have to run these things that most scientists don't run anymore. They're called Southern blots, and now you can use more advanced technologies to get at the same answer, but that wasn't available at the time. Probably you got tested. So
no, it wasn't.
I'm sorry.
No, and I know I'm not the only one in that boat, but it's good to know that going forward, it's less expensive. There's better pathways for that. So that's huge, because yes, it is important to have that done. So making it easier to get it done seems to be a good idea. So that's great. Anything else you wanted to add with what you see or excited about coming into the future?
I think there's so we have the next grant cycle. There's a couple other initiatives we're starting to look into, and these are all these initiatives. The Therapeutic Accelerator initiatives are programs that have been flagged by us, by the different pharmaceutical companies, as being hurdles that they have to overcome when they're running clinical trials. And so we're talking to the pharmaceutical companies and trying to develop ways of solving them with their input, because they're the ones who are going to benefit from it. But the thing that's been absolutely wonderful is pharmaceutical companies that are working on FSHD, you would think they're all competing against each other, because the group that has the first drug is, that's approved, is going to be they're competing for that. But they're actually working collaboratively. So when we have the VCUs, like the VCU 360, we have different companies participating. They all know each other. At the meeting, I saw they were talking to each other and exchanging notes. And that's actually really, really great, really wonderful that they're not working in isolation. They're learning from each other, and they're making even resources or strategies available to each other, because they're all actually very much invested in improving the patient's lives. So that's been really impressive.
Definitely. Yeah, it's kind of putting the patient first in that regard. Then it's not just competing for who's on the top of the list of getting that breakthrough answer. It's, let's work together to help the people. I mean,
Yeah.
that is a great push, to be all on the same page like that. That's great. That's great for all of us that have this disease, that they're all working collaboratively. That's amazing.
Yeah, I've been very impressed by the scientists that I've met, and the industry scientists have also been remarkable. Their insight and their knowledge, and the work that they do is quite impressive. So that's, people always think, well, the big breakthroughs come through academic researchers. The industry is actually paving the way in a different area, but all related to FSHD. They're doing all the clinical work that needs to be done so you can have successful clinical trials.
Right.
And I think that's really important. That's the other side of drug development that people don't typically see, because they can read the papers that come out from academic researchers that get published, but a lot of that work that's done in developing the clinical test and the clinical trial, that's done by industry, and it's usually kind of glossed over. So yeah, it's been very exciting.
Well, you got us a lot of information and in a short amount of time. I love all the things that are happening and that you could bring it to us and give it to us in a way that we can digest it easily. Because, every time I hear chief science officer, I'm like, okay, I am not a scientist. I failed chemistry, I think, once in high school, and that's about as far as I got. Biology wasn't so much better. So it always seems to be above my head. But talking with you, Jamshid, it always is a comfort, like, okay, we got the right guy here. Because not only can he understand it at the scientist level and communicate with that world, but he can bring it to us and understand this is where we're at, this is where we're going, and this is what we're excited about. So I appreciate that.
Oh, thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be able to disseminate information. I think that I get a lot of pleasure from learning, and I learn a lot. Also, I'm meeting with clinicians. I'm not a clinician, so I ask a lot of questions to make sure that I understand things. And I'm grateful that they're patient with me and they explain things. So I know that it's important to make research accessible to people so they understand where things are. So I'm very happy to be in that position, and I'm hopefully, I improve the way I communicate as well and make it understandable.
Yeah, well, it's always great to have you on. I know the public called for you and you answered that call today, and I know we'll have you on again. And I think the goal of the show is to have Jamshid Arjomand on multiple times throughout the year, so we can come back and keep giving us more small snippet updates than the large, huge portions that you gave us like today. So thanks.
I would be happy to, and I'm really hoping to at some point to do an interview. I don't know if you do interviews in person, but I would love to actually meet you.
Really? That'd be great. Yeah. Oh yeah, we got to do that. Absolutely. Because I know that you're at the main office, like you mentioned today, with the team, but you took the time to get this show pre-recorded so you get it out there here in November on time. But I think, all right, the rest of the team is waiting on you for what, pizza and some drinks after this? I mean, got aside to be on here, man. That's great. That's starved right now.
I'm grateful for them that they haven't left me, or I have to check and see if they have. I may go out there and see a note like, take an Uber.
Take an Uber. Here's where we're at. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I won't keep you anymore, sir. Thank you very much for joining us in this show, and we look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. Have a great day.
Absolutely. So that is Jamshid Arjomand. He is the Chief Science Officer of the FSHD Society. He is the guy. And yes, I'm not lying. You guys asked for him to be on the show. You wanted more from him and what's been going on, and he delivered. So why don't we take a quick break? This is a little bit from our sponsor, PerkinElmer. We just were talking about in this interview. You're listening to the FSHD Society radio show. Today's podcast is sponsored by PerkinElmer Genomics. a market leader in biochemical and genomic testing solutions. Perkin-Elmer Genomics understands that obtaining a confirmed genetic diagnosis for FSHD can be difficult and frustrating experience for both patients and their families. That's why their laboratory prides itself on launching new and innovative technologies to help families find answers that they are looking for. Just over a year ago, Perkin-Elmer Genomics introduced the first new diagnostic approach to FSHD type 1 genetic testing in nearly 3 decades. This testing has drastically decreased the time to diagnose while increasing accessibility to patients. Knowing the underlying cause of FSHD can have important implications for the entire family, including help with future medical management decisions. Speak with your provider today and learn more about how you can get testing. Visit PerkinElmerGenomics.com to find out more about available testing options for FSHD and other related neuromuscular disorders that may help you and your family today. That's PerkinElmer Genomics.com. Welcome back to the FSHD Society radio show. Again, a special thank you to our featured guest who was just on, Jamshid Arjomand. If you're joining us late, you happen to miss it, you're like, oh man, don't worry. You'll still be able to find the show, YouTube and other platforms. We also have this episode and all the past ones available on Spotify and pretty much anywhere else you find your podcasts. You can find us. Just search FSHD Society radio show and you will find it. I had a coworker actually come up to me, and maybe he's listening right now. That'd be great. And he said, hey, I listened to the podcast and I was blown away. So we talked about it briefly when I started the job a while back. He found the show and I think he's listened to many episodes. He is not in the FSHD community, does not have the disease. A first time listening to it, first time he understands the disease now through this platform. So thank you. His name is Pete. Thanks, Pete, for listening and, being aboard of our community. I hope you learned something a little more today, like so many of us did. It cannot be done, the research, the things that Jamshid was talking about, without those fundraising events, the walk and rolls, the Giving Tuesday, which is coming up at the end of this month on the 30th. That's Giving Tuesday this year. We'll be on like 4 1-hour segments throughout the day. We'll have great guests. Maybe Jamshid will join us again, even for that event. Great time to donate because as we know what Giving Tuesday means, and we'll probably have a match and other things talking about what's going to be an impactful fundraising event. Walk and roll is great. I think it went up to like $700,000 plus for that event alone. A lot of work gets put into these fundraising events, but a lot of great things come out of it. And that money, of course, translates what we talked about, some of it going to those grants. So that's why it's so important. So important. It's also important that we hit every one of our sponsors. We have 3 of them for this radio show. We're so grateful for them. We've heard from Perkin-Elmer. Now let's hear from Dyn. And we come back, we'll talk a little bit of what's going on, news and events, and close up shop. This is FSHD Society radio show. You're listening to the FSHD Society radio show. FSHD Radio is sponsored by Dyn Therapeutics, a muscle disease company focused on advancing innovative, life-transforming therapeutics for people living with genetically driven diseases. Dyn is developing a broad portfolio of therapies for muscle diseases, including programs in facioscapulohumeral muscular dystrophy, myotonic dystrophy type 1, and Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. Utilizing its proprietary FORCE platform, Dyn is developing modern oligonucleotide therapeutic candidates designed to overcome limitations in delivery to muscle. For more information, please visit dyn-tx.com and follow Dine on LinkedIn and Twitter. Thanks for hanging with us again through another break, and always have to thank our sponsors. Without them, well, I mean, we'd have a show, which might not be as successful. We couldn't get some of those guests, maybe, right? No, our sponsors are amazing. Perkin Elmer, Dine Therapeutics, and the show will hear from Fulcrum as well. Quickly here, though, we want to make sure that you know how to contact me in the show, even when the show is not on air. Please email me, fshdradio@fshdsociety.org. We've had listeners reach out to me talking about certain topics they'd like to discuss, asking me questions of maybe how the podcast started. I've even had some people ask me, hey, I want to start a podcast. How would I do that? Totally here for you. I'm about the community. And if you want to ask me any questions about the show or FSHD Society related things, I can help in that regard. If I can't answer the questions, I'll make sure I direct you to the people that can. So once again, email fshdradio@fshdsociety.org. A little brief, hitting on a couple events here throughout November. FSHDU has the event from 6 to 9 p.m. on the 18th of November. Check that out on fshdsociety.org site, and then click on events. Ontario virtual chapter meeting, they were huge up there in Canada for our walk and roll event. They did an amazing job. And if you want to be part of their virtual chapter meeting, that's 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. on the 20th. Virginia's monthly meeting, 6 to 7 p.m. on the 23rd of November, is coming up. Then to finish up the month, it is the Share Giver Caregiver Hour. It says Eating for Health. Wow. Yeah, that sounds like that's good stuff there. Matt Beck from University of Florida, we've invited Matt, and he's a clinical dietitian to the Fixel Center for Neurological Diseases at the University of Florida. He'll be joining us for this event. Well, that sounds great. So check that out on the 30th of November, which is also Giving Tuesday. So that's also an event too on that day. And like I said, we'll have 4 1-hour interview sections throughout the day. I think it's like, this is all Central Time, 8, 12, 4, and 8. So we'll be throughout the day. You can clue in on that one. So thanks all for joining us today. Thanks for being part of the show. We'll close the show with our final ads from our sponsor at Fulcrum. But before I say good evening and we'll see you in the next show, thank you to you, the listener, the watcher of the show. Thank you very much for being a part of it. And of course, as we were jamming with Jamshid Arjomand, I do have an intro for him. So the more he comes on, I think we're going to have to just have a specialized one just for him. He is an amazing person to come on the show and give us, like I said, takes the science of things and all the research that's happening, talked about a lot of things that might be even definitely above my head, but brings it to where I understand, where's all this going? Where's our money going to? Why the fundraising is so important? The CTRN, why is that so important? Spell it all out for us today. So thank you, Jamshid, for joining us and being a part of this show. Looking forward to having him on more often as the year turns. So thanks again for being here. We'll see you next time. You've been listening to the FSHD Society radio show. Today's FSHD Society radio show is sponsored by Fulcrum Therapeutics. Fulcrum is a clinical stage biopharmaceutical company based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, advancing new medicines that target the root cause of genetically defined rare diseases such as FSHD and sickle cell disease. Fulcrum's approach to drug discovery combines insights from patients with rare diseases with the most advanced tools to identify and develop therapeutics that will target the root cause. For several years, Fulcrum has been honored to work with the FSHD community in efforts to build awareness of the impact of FSHD on individuals and families. Fulcrum works in partnership with leaders from the patient advocacy and medical communities to highlight the impact of rare diseases and support continued research. You can connect with Fulcrum on LinkedIn and follow them on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Fulcrum TX.